Hello. It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Xiang Biao to Insights and Sounds series for the Migration Mobilities Bristol series. And Professor Xiang Biao has studied sociology at Beijing University in China and received his PhD in social anthropology from the University of Oxford, where he also worked since 2004. Professor Xiang Biao is the winner of the 2008 Anthony Leeds Prize for his book, Global Bodyshopping, and his 2000 Chinese book, 跨越边界的社区, with the English title, Transcending Boundaries, published back in 2005, has been a contemporary classic. And his work, I think many of you will be familiar with, has been translated into Japanese, French, Korean, Spanish, and Italian. And since September 2021, Professor Xiang Biao has been the head of the Department Anthropology of Economic Experimentation at the Max Planck Institute for Ethnological Research. So today it is with great pleasure and privilege that we have Professor Xiang Biao as guest to the Insights and Sounds series. So welcome to the series, Professor Xiang. Just a quick hello to you, and hope everything's well at Max Planck. So I'm just wondering, this is just going to be a very casual conversation. We're just really interested to get to know more about your recent work and perhaps some recent projects you've been working on, broadly related to migration studies or mobilities, perhaps through the lens of the infrastructure. And I wonder what might be some latest projects you're working on?
Yeah, personally, I'm working on a number of projects, but the one project I really want to use this opportunity to do a bit of advertisement about is a mobility lab inventory. And this is not a research project. This actually is a research infrastructure building project. And it is supposed to be a platform in which migration and mobility scholars from all over the world can exchange their observations and then cellularize their observations together. The reason we wanted to launch this inventory is because we observed that on one hand, migration and mobility studies is one of the fastest growing field in social science. I mean, we are really lucky because of the political attention and because of the multiple crises related to migration in Europe in particular, but in North America and other parts of the world too. Migration has attracted much attention, and including funding and etc. So a large number of work, empirical work, have been done. But on the other hand, we think there is a tremendous potential in this research has yet to be materialized. That is, we have not yet bring all the diverse cases together to theorize them in a way that will generate large insights. So we wonder whether or not having such a platform and we collect observations, case-specific observations, and write them down in a form that is very clear, concise, empirically rich. We call it like a bricks, right? The bricks you can use to build a larger structure. And of course, we have certain conceptual threads, themes around which we are going to accumulate the bricks. So basically, we want to make migration and mobility studies more cumulative instead of we just have multiple case studies. So this is called the MOLAB, M-O-L-A-B, and at MPA, Max Planck Institute. I mean, if you Google it, you should be able to find it. We were going to revamp it in coming months, but the basic, in terms of structure and etc., but the basic idea will remain the same. So I guess our main audience are researchers and students in migration studies. Right. You are our targeted users. So it'd be great if you take a look and if you can consider contributing. And the final point about this MOLAB inventory, we very much want it to be used for teaching. Because when I was in Oxford teaching MSc Migration Studies, one of the major challenges that the students, the MSc students had, I suppose they're still having that challenge, is that how can they write an original dissertation? If they just do a literature review, I mean, it's very difficult to demonstrate their originality. But on the other hand, given the time constraints, they cannot go out to do field research. So our inventory entries are kind of half-baked bricks. They kind of still soft. You can still reshape it and combine different bricks together to create new ideas. So this is kind of organized raw material, which is supposed to be the latest development in mobility and migration patterns in different parts of the world. So that could be useful for students to develop their own analysis. Yeah.
So basically, it will be a platform for students and researchers to basically create various structures with Max Planck Institute as the supporting kind of structure, or do you plan to show them the concrete cases from different parts of the world and create dialogues? So you have, I see.
So just if that's okay, I just give you a very quick example that just come to my mind, because you also asked what is my research. For example, we do have one theme is called securitization of mobility. With COVID, what we observed is that actually no society can afford to really stop mobility. I mean, all the stop and the restriction of mobility are tactical. The main purpose is still to maintain mobility as much as possible because mobility is the basis of the modern market economy. And how are you going to do that? I mean, the completely lockdown is a really temporary measure. So the one measure is to securitize mobility, basically to minimize the perceived threat associated with mobility. I mean, in the COVID case is of course the threat of infections. By tracing and contacting apps, then the requirement that you must have a vaccination certificate before you can travel. So that's almost as important as a visa or passport nowadays. Then in some countries, particularly in Asia and China being the primary example, you have this kind of a QR code which you monitor your health condition, your mobility, and your contact. It's not only about you, but also about the people around you and where you have walked through. So all this is quite a comprehensive information to securitize the mobility without really forbidding your mobility. So that is one theme. We want to collect information about how different parts of the world are doing that. We have other themes like linked and distributed mobility, which is related to another phenomenon we observed recently. During COVID, mobility is being redistributed rather than just completely halted. Because we do see the increase of mobility of key workers, for instance, but also we see the increase of mobility of some smugglers and clandestine mobilities. So what it really matters is the redistribution of mobility across the population. So we want to talk about it's linked and distributed mobility. It's possibly a new way looking at the mobility, or maybe not. But anyway, that is a way to collect information for now, and we will see what grow out of that. It is experimental. So therefore, I really need your participation and the feedback. Yeah.
Great. And coming back to that securitization of mobility, I think that's such an interesting and rich concept. So Professor Xiang, why do you think, as you say, some parts of the world seem to put that securitization priority much more forcefully than other parts? Say, as you mentioned, Asian countries use those measures in such a strong and forceful way, whereas, perhaps here in the UK, for example, people would say it's being too relaxed, too slack. There's not enough securitization. how do you help us understand those differentiations?
Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, of course, there is we can approach this question from two angles, namely intention, number one, and the capability, number two. You can say it's a will and the ways, right? Whether or not they have a will to do that, and then the Asian states, for various reasons, they have a strong will to do that, and in European states in general, but I think the UK in particular, probably they do not have a strong will to do that because they think it can be counterproductive. Here, the question of a will or the calculation or the political decision, it must be emphasized. It's not purely based on scientific and medical consideration, and it is very political in multiple sense. I mean, but the one thing I just want to emphasize is that I suppose many, I mean, we don't have a straightforward evidence for that, but it is a plausible hypothesis that many governments see this is as an opportunity to build up a digital infrastructure for population monitoring and control. So even if this securitization of mobility contribute little to COVID disease control, but it will contribute greatly to the governmental capacity in the future to monitor the population for various purposes. So that's a question of a will. And then you have the question of ways, whether or not they have the means and the capability to do that. In Asia, that is interesting. I think there's a much better developed. We can call it the mobility infrastructure. They are able to monitor who is who and who is where you have been. And this infrastructure is not something you can build overnight, because that's related to, for instance, grassroots community organizations in both cities and the countryside. Because, I mean, people need to be quarantined, and you must have the neighborhood organization to make sure the person do not step out of the door within 14 days, but then allow them to step out during after the quarantine time. During quarantine time, you have to mobilize someone else to move in order to deliver food to the doorsteps 3 times a day. And you must mobilize people to move door to door to collect temperature, etc. That is what the Chinese government did, right? And then you have all the transportation system and of course, the identity check system, all the things that come together, then you can effectively securitize mobility. I mean, one thing we find, especially by comparing the case from China and the case of India, actually the one kind of a weak link in the entire system or practice of control, monitoring mobility actually is a question of a quarantine. Once if migrant workers, they come to city, you can control, okay, when they buy ticket on the train, you can control. But once they arrive at the city, of course, if international travelers are in the airport, you can take them to certain hotels, etc. But migrants come, with buses or on train. How you can make sure this individual migrants from miles and miles away will, voluntarily organize a quarantine for themselves? That is difficult to do. So the securitization mobility is a complex operation. It's mobility intersected with e-mobility. So that's, I think, from these two angles, the intention, the political decision on one hand, and there's a social technical infrastructure which enables such operation, both play important roles.
Wow, that's really fascinating. We look forward to hearing more about your research. And yeah, this is just a short introductory notes, and hopefully all the listeners could check out Professor Xiang Biao and her work at and his work at MoLab at Max Planck Institute. So thank you very much, Professor Xiang, and we look forward to having you here again, perhaps in future. Thank you.
Thank you.